Putin wishes 500,000 Russians more dead in Ukraine. Good afternoon, this is Henry Keane on UATV channel explaining complex things in simple terms. According to Ukrainian intelligence, starting from January 9th, 2023, Russian conscripts were restricted from leaving the country. So the new mobilization wave, which the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov, warned about and which was declined by Russian officials, can be now considered confirmed. Why? Because the Kremlin is obviously trying to compensate for the loss of quality with quantity, since the regular Russian army was practically destroyed last year. Poorly trained soldiers and outdated equipment. This is what the second army of the world turned out to be on the battlefield. This is why more cannon fodder is needed. It's cheap, renewable, and ignorant enough to be slaughtered in large scales and never to show a single sign of disobedience. With no uniform, no training, no artillery, with endless carousel of commanders, still they are expected by Putin's regime to be a factor that will change the course of the war for the better for Russia. Cannon fodder. The whole of Russia is nothing but cannon fodder for Putin. Well, the armed forces of Ukraine can also additionally mobilize the same amount of cannon fodder. We can do that, but we won't. Because it takes a lot more to win than just mindlessly hanging out 500,000 summons. We need an army of defenders, not an army of dead men walking. Actually, the mobilization in Russia never stops. And Moscow deliberately summoned people from different regions of the country so that shockingly huge cemeteries with fresh graves on them would not appear all of a sudden in one place. Most of the newly mobilized are still from the outback and the suburbs of the country. Military commissars hardly touch large cities. They are afraid of a violent reaction of Moscow or St. Petersburg residents. There will also be no demonstrative raids on the streets, as people will be pulled out quietly. Ilya Ponomaryov, ex-deputy of the Russian State Duma, believes. And the Russian citizens feel that they just cannot influence what is going on in their own country. The war, mobilization, the bureaucratic lawlessness.
Считают, чувствуют, что от них ничего не зависит.
Russians believe and feel that nothing depends on them. They cannot influence what decisions the country's leadership makes. This is wrong. In fact, when people take to the streets en masse, resist en masse, organize partisan action en masse, they can influence, but they don't believe in it.
So, will large mobilization improve or worsen the combat effectiveness of the Russian armed forces? According to experts, the Russian armed forces are capable of simultaneously training no more than 130,000 at training facilities at once. And this is on condition that the instructors do not take part in actions on the battlefield themselves, of course. So, what do you do with these 500,000 newbies? How to get them at least somewhat trained to get elementary combat and survival skills? And what about the Ukrainian Army? In addition to all our domestic Ukrainian training centers, our fighters are training right now in 14 NATO countries. As of September, according to Alexei Gromov, Deputy Chief of the Main Operation Directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, more than 2,000 artillerymen, 500 missile system specs, 500 air defense specs, almost 200 anti-tank weapons operators in total underwent more than 100 trainings abroad. The United States is training our pilots and specs to operate modern heavy weapons both on the ground and in the air. In the United Kingdom, the Rapid Reaction Ground Forces are being trained. 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers are now undergoing intensive infantry training at an army base in the southwest of England, whom the British military has promised to get fully trained within 120 days. The armed forces of Ukraine are also taught in Norway, Denmark, the Baltic countries, Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. In addition, the Ukrainian military is also trained by instructors from countries that are not yet members of NATO, Sweden and Finland. The presence of a large number of military personnel seems to be the only trump card remaining for the Russians.
Of course, all of our analytical, intelligence and information structures are working at full power. A systematic analysis is constantly being conducted at all levels. So this another wave of mobilization in Russia has not been a secret for a long time, said Cherevati, spokesman for the Eastern Group of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, during the Ukrainian teleton.
There is one more story that I would like you to know about, dear world, before I close this theme for today. Please meet Valeri Berezovsky. Usual Russian, and his story is very usual. Valeri comes from a remote village in Siberia. That means that Valeri comes from a dreadful lack of perspectives, from a sister that has 3 children, from a young brother and a paralyzed grandmother Valeri needed to take care of. All that made Valeri to come to Ukraine to kill us. Just think about it for a moment, how grim one's present and hopeless future must be to come to another country to kill its people as the only well-paid job in yours. Valeri was killed in Gostomel. Putin's regime promised 5 million rubles to be paid to the relatives in this case. Guess what? His native sister and her 3 daughters, younger brother and paralyzed granny are not relatives enough for Putin. Since Valeri had no wife and no children directly, well, then he died for, I don't know, just died. No money for the family. No present, no future, no one to take care of the family anymore. Multiply Valeri's story at 112,000 Russians already killed in Ukraine and you will get the picture of Russia's present. Multiply that by 500,000 more expected to be mobilized this January and you will get the picture of the Russian future. So that's the whole thing to explain here. Yes, Putin will get his 500,000 body bags fillers coming to Ukraine, of course not of what his propaganda calls a patriotism, no, but simply because there are no better perspectives for them in Russia other than to fertilize Ukrainian soil with their useless lives. And who knows, maybe their families will get a pittance from the Kremlin this time. Ukraine is preparing for the 23rd Ukraine-EU summit to be held on February 3rd in Kiev, although the meeting should take place every year. However, in 2022, we were engaged in slightly more important matters like saving our country and the whole of the Europe from Russian invasion. We are looking forward to the European politicians to come over to Kiev. We always welcome brave people who are not afraid of possible missile attacks in particular and martial law in general. It is not easy to get to Kiev these days. Get a train, cross the country, look at the photos of how beautiful our country once was, and look through the window when you will be passing Bucha and Irpin cities destroyed by Russia. This is what the aggressor wants to do to our country. And then just look at the YouTube videos from about any Russian province or suburb. People there, without any warfare, live just the same way as we do here under shelling and violent terrorist attacks. No future, no civilization, no life. This is what Russia brings wherever it comes. But we want a different life in Ukraine. And we hope that the next summit will bring us another step closer towards the European family. Our family. We are Europe because we are fighting for it. It is not for nothing President Zelensky's first call in 2023 was to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. The 2 politicians spoke of Ukraine's and its European priorities. And the day before, our President spoke with the President of the European Council, Charles Michel.
Я дякую пану президенту Європейської Ради.
I am grateful to the President of the European Council for understanding how important it is to maintain the unwavering support of Ukraine in this confrontation in which Russia is trying to exhaust all of us, Ukrainians, Europeans, other partners. They must be clear of signals that we will go all the way to the defeat of Russian terror. We will go together and with the preservation of stability in Ukraine, financial and social. And that is why financial support was one of the main topics of my conversation with Charles Michel, as well as weapons and further European integration of Ukraine.
Currently, Volodymyr Zelensky makes a preparation calls for the summit every day. He also held a video call with Prime Minister of Sweden Ulf Kristersson on January 6th to discuss the priorities of Sweden during its presidency of the Council of the European Union. Ukraine hopes that under Sweden's presidency, we will be able to start negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the EU. It is a powerful motivator for our army and a common desire of our society. We also believe that it will be a strong incentive for unity within the European Union. Minister Kuleba and the head of EU diplomacy, Josep Borrell, spoke on the telephone, discussing in details the preparations for the summit. They outlined expectations and focused on a format that will ensure its success. By providing Ukraine with candidate status last year, all member states made it clear that Ukraine will join the European Union soon. We are working and fighting hard on implementing all requirements set by the European Commission in order to proceed towards opening accession talks.
The very strong Ukrainian wish to use every possibility to get closer to the European Union in a more political sense, something which I'm sure will be one important element when the EU-Ukraine summit will take place on February 3rd in Ukraine. So Ukraine will continue to be, sort of casting its shadow over our entire presidency. Another issue will, of course, be the economic development, and particularly then the energy-related issues, which we all know that the soaring energy prices are a very important part of the reason why we are now.
We have no doubt that as an European member state, Ukraine will significantly strengthen the security of Europe and its global role. Ukraine has demonstrated the real fighting spirit and commitment to protect everything European nations hold dear. As an EU member state, Ukraine will strengthen Europe's food security, contribute to the implementation of the European Green Deal, the development of trans-European networks for energy and for transport, digital governance, boost cybersecurity and resilience to hybrid threats, as well as many other areas where Ukraine and the EU make each other stronger. After we win, we will not just rebuild Ukraine, no. We will transform it into a new geopolitical entity that matches all the best of international European standards. Global volunteer community is in shock. On January the 6th, two volunteers, Andrew Bagshaw and Chris Parry, went to carry out the evacuation in the Solidar Bakhmut area. Since then, contact with them has been lost. On the right is Andy. He's 48. He arrived from New Zealand at the start of the war and has been helping Ukraine ever since, delivering aid and evacuating civilians as an independent volunteer. Writes another volunteer, Ignatius Ivlev York, on Facebook. Another volunteer, Chris Parry, celebrated his 28th birthday just a week ago, and he spent it just like he did every other day of the past year, evacuating civilians from a war zone. Our war journalists that work on the front line also saw Chris in Bakhmut, and we want to air a small interview with the hero.
You make evacuation of civilian people, and yes, and how many time you work here in Bakhmut? How many time?
For the past 2 or 3 months I've been here, and then was in Severodonetsk in the summer, and Makivka, Liman.
Please tell me the story about yesterday, the problems you have with the car, and you help 6 people, like you said. Can you a little story?
So I had an evacuation in the morning and got 6 people from the front on the east side of Bakhmut, and I was about 200 meters away from the Russians at that point. Took them out, including 2 mentally disabled children. Then on the second run back in, spoke to the military, and they said it's very risky, but maybe you can do it. They showed me which route to take, and as I was driving there, about 100 meters away from the Russians or so, a tank shot me. Once missed about 10 meters away, so I went around the houses to get out of view. Then when I came back out to the road, shot again and landed about 2 meters from the wheel, blew up the wheel. Managed to get away, but tried to change the tyre, which I did eventually, and then the tyre burst when I went over the river, so then was stuck there for the night, and then in the morning went across the river the other way with a flat tyre and messed up, and it slipped into the river.
You right now, you was close very to Russian, you said, yes?
Yeah, about 100 meters or so.
100 meters?
Yep.
And how the situation there? Shooting.
Awful, absolutely awful. The soldiers who were maybe 300 meters from the Russians, they were describing it constantly as just hell. This is hell. They couldn't go upstairs at all in the basement. Constant bombardment, the building was shaking, small arms fire, guys with RPGs waiting, snipers everywhere. It's kind of like a video game, it's ridiculous.
The two are true heroes who saved countless people during the horrors of the war. The Ukrainian Army and police are doing everything to find our brothers in arms, and we hope to find them alive and in good health. God bless them. It was Henry Keane on UATV channel, hoping for the best while explaining complex things in simple terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and tuned.